an old janitor silently at work, an arrogant teacher, and a dusty piano in the corner of the room. What started as a cruel joke to mock the elderly woman turned into a soul-stirring performance, causing the entire prestigious school to fall silent and shattering the pride of those who once looked down on her. You would never have guessed how the old woman turned the tables, not with anger or arguments, but through the music that came from the very depths of her heart. Willow Ridge Academy is one of the most prestigious schools, where each morning is marked by luxury cars lined up to drop students off at the gate. From the shiny vehicles, teenagers step out in designer clothes, with neat hairstyles, confident eyes, and proud postures. They grew up in wealth, and that shows in every step they take, every laugh that echoes across the campus. But amidst this opulent and radiant setting, there is a small, silent figure. It is Martha, the elderly janitor, dark-skinned, her back slightly hunched with the weight of the years. In contrast to the bright laughter and proud gazes of the students, Martha quietly bows her head, pushing an old mop cart down the long, endless hallways. The dark blue janitor's uniform hangs loosely over her frail frame, and her wrinkled, calloused hands tirelessly clean every corner of the school. No one notices her, no one greets her. They pass by her as if she were a shadow, an inanimate object. Sometimes she stops, her deep brown eyes lifting to look at the students walking by. Her gaze, though tinged with sadness, is calm, as if she has long accepted her invisibility among the people here. Martha never expected anyone to stop and greet her or pay her attention. She quietly accepts her place, silently doing her work, like a shadow in the midst of the lavish surroundings. But little did she know, in just a few days, it would be she, the forgotten figure, who would turn the entire order of Willow Ridge Academy's proud, prejudiced world upside down. The large clock in the hallway chimed, signaling the end of another long day at Willow Ridge Academy. The lively chatter of the students slowly faded into the quiet, leaving behind the stillness of the long, echoing hallways. Martha, though tired, still patient, placed her cleaning tools into the old cart and gently stepped out of the familiar school gates. Her steps moved slowly along the narrow paths, fading out of sight from the remaining few. No longer in her loose janitor's uniform, now only an elderly woman with a faded sweater, she blended into the lonely evening light quietly. Her small home sat at the end of a narrow street, modest, yet tidy and clean. There was no one waiting for her, no one to greet her, only the familiar creaking sound of the door each time she returned. Upon entering the small house, she lit an old desk lamp, the soft yellow light gently revealing a simple but warm corner of the room. On the small table by the window, several black and white photos, now yellowed with age, were carefully placed, as though preserving beautiful yet distant memories. Among the photos there was a young woman with a radiant smile, bright eyes full of hope, her delicate hands resting lightly on the black and white piano keys. That was Martha in her youth, a Martha full of ambition and talent, who once stood on grand stages to the sound of thunderous applause. But fate has never been kind, especially to that talented young black woman. Back then, despite her innate talent, Martha could not escape the shadow of poverty and societal prejudice. The opportunities she deserved kept slipping away, replaced by cold stares and bitter rejections. The doors of the stage slammed shut in front of her, not because she lacked talent, but because her skin color and background were never accepted by society at that time. Over time, the young Martha was forced to fold away her dreams, burying them deep within her heart, leaving behind the beautiful music she had once passionately pursued. And now, after many years, all that remained was an elderly woman, silently accepting a life of solitude as if her once bright youth had never existed. And every night, when everything falls into slumber, Martha quietly steps into the small church at the end of the road, where an old piano still sings the most beautiful sounds. She silently sits before the keys, letting her old, trembling fingers once again live through the old passion, in the quiet notes that no one can hear. The music plays softly in the dark of the church, as if comforting a life that has suffered too much loss, as if reminding Martha that somewhere inside this small, elderly body, a faint spark of yesterday's light still remains. Little did Martha know that those small, quiet notes would soon be heard in the brightest of lights, causing the entire dazzling world to fall silent and listen. The weak moonlight filtered through the old tree canopy, casting a pale, hazy light over the narrow path leading to the church, like a thin mist covering the memories of Mrs. Martha. As the darkness thickened over the town and the last sounds of the day faded away, it was then that she quietly draped the faded sweater over her frail shoulders and slowly stepped out of her small, solitary house. For many years, every night was the same. Her steps were steady as she walked down that path, following the narrow, worn trail that led to the old church nestled quietly in the heart of the poor neighborhood. The church was nothing special, its architecture simple and modest, just like her life. The brick walls were cracked with age, some parts peeling away, but strangely enough it still radiated an unusually warm light that no one could explain. Perhaps it was love, perhaps it was memory, or perhaps it was simply because this was the only place she could find some peace in a life full of storms. Each time she entered the church, she gently closed the wooden door behind her, completely separating herself from the outside world. In that small, quiet space, Mrs. Martha became someone entirely different. Not the old, neglected janitor, forgotten and looked down upon, but simply an elderly artist returning to what she loved most in life, the piano. That old piano had been there for countless years, the keys yellowed, the once glossy black paint now covered with a thin layer of dust from time. Yet, every night when she placed her calloused hands on the keys, the sound still rang out clearly, strangely pure, as if the notes had been waiting for her to awaken them. Mrs. Martha sat there, closing her eyes for a long while before she began to play, for she needed a moment of silence, a space for the old memories to flood back naturally. As her fingers first gently touched the keys, the memories came alive with each note, as if they had never been dulled by the harshness of life outside. She clearly remembered her first performance as a young, promising girl, her heart racing before hundreds of eyes watching from the grand hall. Back then, her hands trembled, but were full of life, each note enchanting the audience. The applause rang out warmly when the performance ended, and young Martha believed that her life would always belong to music. But time passed, and Martha came to understand that life was not simply about talent or passion. The world around her was full of harsh prejudices, especially against a poor black girl. No matter how talented she was, she would always be like a beautiful flower growing in the wrong place, forever unrecognized. The doors to grand performances, the dazzling stages, turned her away one by one, not because they didn't recognize her ability, but because they could not accept her background and skin color. That pain forced Martha to put away her dream, slowly turning her back on her passion, returning to become an ordinary, nameless person that society deemed more fitting for her role. Since then, the piano no longer served as a stage for her brilliance, but rather became a secret friend she kept to herself, quietly and deeply. Now, with age weighing heavily on her shoulders like a burden, each note she played no longer carried the youthful hopes, but only contained the regret and longing for a life that could have been different. Every night she played for herself, played to keep the unfinished dreams alive, not yet completely swept away by time. She played the pieces she had loved in her youth, Symphonies by Beethoven, Chopin, and Debussy, melodies so beautiful they could only resonate within the walls of the small old church. No one else knew this secret, not even the closest people around her, because she didn't want to share the most precious part of her life with a world that had once been so cold and cruel to her. After each session, she would stand, carefully close the lid of the piano as if it were a ritual, and then gently return home, back to the lonely and silent reality. Tonight, under the faint moonlight, she sat once again before the piano, but strangely, she felt something was different. A vague sense that life was no longer simply about the endless repetition of days. A gentle but strong premonition that the secret she had cherished all these years would no longer remain a secret forever. However, Mrs. Martha could not have known that tomorrow, the world that had always made her invisible would push her into the light in a ruthless way, forcing her to once again touch the keys before the cold, skeptical eyes of others. Those people would never understand that when music has lived in someone's heart long enough, no matter how it is beaten down, it will always find a way to speak, shattering every prejudice that life has imposed upon it. And at the most unexpected moment, Mrs. Martha would not just be an old, forgotten woman. She would become the most miraculous thing that the proud Willow Ridge School had ever witnessed. While Mrs. Martha remains deeply immersed in the world of piano melodies filled with mystery, not far away at the prestigious Willow Ridge Academy, an entirely different world is quietly operating, yet full of glamour, vanity, and dark corners that are hard to see. And at the center of this world is none other than Madison Harrington, the most beautiful, wealthiest, most powerful, and arrogant student at this prestigious school. Madison not only possesses beauty that makes others marvel in admiration, with her silky, well-cared-for golden hair and captivating icy blue eyes, but she is also the heir to a vast fortune and power from the Harrington family, one of the most elite families in the city. From childhood, Madison has never known what it's like to lack anything. She's never had to strive for anything because, to her, everything can be bought with money, fame, and social status. At the age of 17, Madison quickly realized her power and knew how to exploit it to its fullest. She knows exactly what to do and say to make everyone's attention gravitate toward her. Teachers favor her. Friends constantly surround her, all trying to get her attention. Madison takes this for granted because, in her world, it's only natural that others idolize her. However, beneath her perfect beauty and charm lies a cold, arrogant heart. For Madison, those less fortunate, those she considers lower in social status, deserve nothing but contempt and mockery. And among those small, insignificant people is Mrs. Martha, the elderly janitor who silently works at the school, the person Madison particularly targets as her daily amusement. There's no specific reason for her behavior. Madison simply feels discomfort when seeing the frail, aged, and weary figure of Mrs. Martha pass through the halls. She's like a blemish on the glamorous painting of the prestigious school. For Madison, teasing Mrs. Martha is no different from a small pleasure to demonstrate her power, relieving the pointless tensions of her luxurious life while also reminding herself of the high position she holds. Every day, Madison deliberately performs seemingly accidental actions that are actually intentional, making Mrs. Martha's life more difficult. Sometimes it's a cup of hot coffee spilled on the floor. Other times it's a box of cake purposely knocked over, or simply the marks of dirty shoes that Madison deliberately stomps onto the shiny floor. Each time, Madison stands at a corner of the hallway, watching with malicious delight, waiting for Mrs. Martha to appear with her mop to clean up the mess Madison has caused. What satisfies Madison the most is the moment she sees Mrs. Martha's resigned, enduring face as she bends down to clean the stains Madison has just created. For this young girl, actions like these never make her feel regret or guilt, because she firmly believes that society has already drawn clear boundaries. The rich and powerful, like her, have the right to decide, while people like Mrs. Martha were born to serve and endure. Once, a close friend of Madison hesitantly asked her if she ever felt that she might be going too far. But Madison simply responded with a cold smile and a firm statement. People like her are born to clean up things like that. If she doesn't want to struggle, why doesn't she try to be richer and more powerful? Madison's words made her friends fall silent. Even though they sometimes felt her actions were too much, no one had the courage to speak out against her because they were too afraid of losing the favor of this powerful girl. Madison's arrogance and indifference grew larger each day because she had never faced the consequences of her actions. She always lived in a perfect world created by her family and society, where every mistake was covered up with money and favor. But Madison never imagined that her arrogance would be the very thing that caused her perfect world to begin cracking. And the elderly woman she had always looked down on, Mrs. Martha, would be the one to turn everything upside down. In her blind confidence, Madison never imagined a day would come when Mrs. Martha would no longer remain silent and enduring. And Madison, with her seemingly harmless malice, was unknowingly preparing the grandest, brightest stage where Mrs. Martha would step up and use the musical talent she had always hidden to make Madison realize that the value of a person is never measured by status or money. But that day hasn't come yet, and right now, Madison still arrogantly walks through the school hallways, laughing and joking with friends, while Mrs. Martha silently bends down to clean the stains Madison has made. Both of them are unaware that, in just a few days, their lives will suddenly intersect in a way no one could ever imagine. And the arrogance Madison always considered her strongest weapon will become the very thing that will make her experience, for the first time in her life, what true failure and humiliation feel like. In the perfect world that Madison Harrington always proudly saw herself as the center of, she was never alone. Alongside Madison stood people like Mr. Richard Grayson, the renowned music teacher who helped nurture and further instill the pride and arrogance deeply embedded in the wealthy students of Willow Ridge Academy. Mr. Grayson was a man in his 50s, tall and lean, with an air of power about him. His sharp eyes constantly observed everything in great detail, as if he knew every thought of the person in front of him. A famous pianist before transitioning into teaching at this prestigious school, he always wore expensive suits, meticulously groomed his white hair, and his hands were adorned with a luxury watch, almost as if to solidify his social status. But behind that polished and sophisticated appearance was a man full of arrogance and coldness. Mr. Grayson firmly believed the world was clearly divided into the rich and the poor, the truly talented and the untalented. In his mind, talent and wealth always went hand in hand. Students like Madison Harrington, coming from wealthy families, were always treated with favor, cherished as precious gems, while those from less fortunate backgrounds, no matter their potential, were never given a second glance. For Mr. Grayson, teaching music at Willow Ridge Academy wasn't just a simple teaching job. It was his own personal stage, where he could showcase his power and assert his superiority in front of everyone. He often organized grand piano performances and competitive music contests that created subtle rivalries between students. These performances weren't meant to develop the students' talents. They were primarily designed to affirm his supreme position, reinforce the admiration of wealthy parents, and boost his already glittering reputation in the music world. More than anyone else, he understood the value of wealth, the luxurious gifts from wealthy families, the parties held just to have him attend, the lavish praise he received. All these drove him to become increasingly arrogant. Sometimes he didn't hesitate to openly show his prejudice and disdain for blue-collar workers like Mrs. Martha, who in his eyes was just a small, insignificant figure, unworthy of attention. Once, while walking down the school corridor and seeing Mrs. Martha bent over cleaning stains, he lowered his voice to a student standing nearby, loud enough for her to hear. "If you don't study properly, your future will be no different from hers." His cold, ruthless words echoed in Mrs. Martha's mind, but she could only bow her head in silence, knowing she had no power to challenge someone as powerful as Mr. Grayson. Furthermore, during his music lessons, Mr. Grayson created a fierce atmosphere of competition. He didn't hesitate to belittle students who lacked confidence or talent in front of the entire class. He believed that this harshness would make the top students stronger, while the weaker students would learn that they didn't belong in his world, a world reserved only for the exceptional, the elite. With Madison Harrington, Mr. Grayson showed particular favor. He often spent extra time after class to give her private lessons, always placing her at the center of the school's biggest performances, and praising her talent even when she made clear mistakes. To him, true talent wasn't about who deserved it, but rather the student's social status and reputation. Madison, with her perfect appearance and wealthy background, naturally became the ideal model of what he considered talent. Gradually, Mr. Grayson's blatant favoritism towards Madison and other wealthy students fostered a deeply ingrained culture of discrimination within the school. Wealthy students felt proud and powerful, while those less fortunate grew increasingly withdrawn, struggling with feelings of inferiority. But for Mr. Grayson, none of that mattered because he was focused solely on building his own reputation and power, indifferent to the consequences his discriminatory attitude might have on others. However, what Mr. Grayson never anticipated was that his arrogance and disregard for others would lead to an unexpected event at Willow Ridge Academy. In his pride, he had unintentionally set up a situation that he thought would further solidify his power. But instead, that situation opened up a completely new stage, one not belonging to him or Madison, but to the elderly woman he had always held in contempt. And in that moment of surprise, Mr. Grayson would, for the first time in his life, confront the truth that true talent never depends on background or social status, and the power he had always boasted about was actually fragile when faced with the genuine music that came from the heart of someone who truly loved the art. It was precisely because of his blind confidence and the power no one dared challenge that Mr. Grayson had never imagined a day would come when he would lose control over the stage he had created. One ordinary morning, like any other, in the largest and most magnificent music room of Willow Ridge Academy, Mr. Grayson stood firmly before his students, his sharp eyes scanning every young face, filled with confidence and a touch of arrogance. This was a special lesson he called Impromptu Music Day, an opportunity for students to showcase their improvisational skills, natural talent, and confidence in front of an audience, which, according to him, only those truly exceptional could do. One by one, the students walked up to sit in front of the grand black piano, their fingers trembling slightly under the piercing gaze and judgment of their notoriously strict teacher. After each performance, Mr. Grayson did not hesitate to give blunt feedback, sometimes cold and even cruel, causing the whole class to hold their breath, both fearful and admiring of their powerful teacher. Madison sat in the middle of the room, like a princess full of pride, her blue eyes gleaming with amusement as she watched her peers being critiqued and losing confidence under the pressure from Mr. Grayson. She had never feared this moment, because she knew for certain that, whether she played well or poorly, she would always receive praise from him. Because simply put, she was Madison Harrington, the center of his perfect world. After a boy finished his lackluster performance, Madison looked up with a smirk, speaking in a voice laced with sarcasm. "Mr. Grayson, why don't we try something a bit more different today?" Mr. Grayson tilted his head, his eyes gleaming with interest at the suggestion from his favorite student. "What do you have in mind, Madison?" Madison cast a meaningful glance toward the hallway, where Mrs. Martha, the janitor, was busy cleaning the floor. A malicious smile briefly appeared on her lips, and Madison spoke loudly enough for the whole class to hear. "Why don't you invite Mrs. Janitor in here to play a piece of music? Maybe she's only used to cleaning piano keys, but we might get a chance to relax." Laughter erupted throughout the class, the mocking sound spreading like a wave across the room, causing Madison's face to beam with triumph. A few students exchanged amused glances, while others awkwardly laughed along, as no one dared oppose Madison. Mr. Grayson hesitated briefly, but quickly smiled, as he had never imagined that the old janitor could do anything other than clean the floors. To him, Madison's suggestion was a great opportunity for amusement, and it would also strengthen his relationship with his rich favorite student. "Interesting idea, Madison," he said loudly, stepping out into the hallway, where Mrs. Martha was still quietly working. He called out in a polite but cold tone, "Mrs. Martha, would you mind coming in here for a moment?" Mrs. Martha startled and stood up straight, looking back at Mr. Grayson in confusion. Her heart raced a little faster, as no teacher or student had ever called her into the classroom before. She walked cautiously toward the music room door, her aged hands trembling slightly, her mind filled with doubt and unease. "Come in," Mr. Grayson's voice echoed coldly, making Mrs. Martha step into the grand room with a sense of insecurity stronger than ever before. The curious and judgmental eyes of the students made her even more nervous, and she lowered her gaze, avoiding eye contact with anyone. "We're having a special lesson today, and Madison thought it would be interesting to let you try playing a piece of music," he said clearly, stretching out the word "interesting," while his eyes gleamed with hidden mockery. Mrs. Martha stood frozen, her heart tightening with humiliation and shame under the scrutinizing gazes of the students. The mocking laughter still echoed in her ears, each sound like a cold knife plunging deep into a heart that had already endured too much pain throughout her life. Madison crossed her arms, her lips curling into a satisfied smirk as she watched Mrs. Martha's flustered expression, silently thinking that this would be the most entertaining performance of the day. Mr. Grayson stepped closer to the piano, looking at Mrs. Martha with a challenging, arrogant gaze, and spoke in a clear, cold voice. "Mrs. Martha, show us what you can do. Don't worry, we don't expect too much." A few quiet laughs spread across the room. Some students whispered excitedly, all eagerly anticipating the upcoming spectacle. Amid the cold stares of Mr. Grayson, Madison's triumphant grin, and the mocking laughter of the class, Mrs. Martha stood silently, her shoulders trembling slightly. In that moment, she felt as though she had been pushed into a corner where she could no longer remain silent and endure any longer. But no one in that room knew that, in what seemed like the most hopeless moment, the small, aged, and long-suffering woman was about to step onto the most significant stage of her life. And what she was about to do would forever change how everyone viewed her, music, and the true value of every person in that seemingly perfect school. In that vast music room, the mocking laughter slowly died down, replaced by an eerie silence filled with expectation. All eyes were fixed on the small, frail woman standing nervously in the middle of this unfamiliar, dazzling space, one she had never belonged to. The mocking laughter of Madison, the cold, disdainful smile of Mr. Grayson, and the curious, pitying, or amused glances of the students, all seemed to pierce into Mrs. Martha's mind, making her feel as though the entire world was turning against her. In that moment, Mrs. Martha had but one clear thought: to leave this place quickly, to escape the humiliation and pain that surrounded her. She turned to leave the grand music room, intending to return to the familiar hallways, to her everyday cleaning work. The work she had silently done for decades, unnoticed. Her legs trembled as she prepared to step away, but just then, something deep in her heart stirred with intensity. The painful past, the memories long buried, came flooding back. She remembered her youth, full of passion, the times when she stood on stage, immersed in the applause, in the genuine recognition and admiration for her music. She recalled the long nights sitting alone in the small church, quietly playing the piano to forget the pain society had inflicted on her, to hold on to the last shred of hope in her life. And now she realized that this moment, amidst the mockery and disdain, was when she had to decide whether to continue living in silence, enduring, or to stand up and defend her own worth. Mrs. Martha felt her heart pounding, as if it wanted to break free from her chest. Her breath quickened. Her old, calloused hands clenched tightly as if to reassure herself, to find some fragile courage still left within her. A faint voice echoed in her mind, urging her to give up, to leave now and avoid further harm. But at the same time, another voice, stronger and much clearer, rang out decisively, urging her to stop and face it all. She had lived too long in the shadows, endured too much suffering and mockery. She didn't want her life to sink any further into that meaninglessness for even another moment. The people standing before her, laughing at her, they had never truly understood who she was, never known the potential and true value within this small, old woman. They saw only a poor janitor. They saw the weakness and inferiority society had branded her with. And she decided that it was time to prove to them that they were wrong. With all the courage she had just found deep within her heart, Mrs. Martha lifted her head and for the first time looked directly into the eyes of Mr. Grayson and Madison. Her gaze was no longer one of resignation and fear, but one of determination, a strength she hadn't known she possessed. In that room, the atmosphere suddenly shifted. The students, even Madison, were taken aback for a moment by the strength in Mrs. Martha's eyes, the eyes of someone who had just made the most important decision of her life. She took a deep breath and step by step, slowly but steadily moved toward the grand piano in the middle of the room. Each step resonated softly but firmly on the polished wooden floor, creating a sound faint yet strong enough to make the entire room hold its breath. Madison followed her every step, the mocking smile on her face slowly fading, replaced by a brief look of confusion, which quickly turned back into her usual coldness. Mr. Grayson crossed his arms in front of his chest, raising an eyebrow challengingly, completely disbelieving that Mrs. Martha could do anything other than make herself a laughingstock in front of the class. Mrs. Martha sat down at the piano, gently placing her weathered hands on the familiar keys. The keys felt cold but familiar under her fingers, like old friends reunited after a long time apart. In that moment, she could no longer see anyone around her, no longer saw Madison, no longer saw Mr. Grayson, nor felt the mocking gazes surrounding her. All she could feel was the music, the powerful call of the art that had always lived in her heart for so many years. At that moment, all doubt, fear, and resignation vanished completely from her heart. Mrs. Martha was ready, not only to face her painful past, but also determined to use the very talent she had always kept hidden, to make those who had mocked and belittled her today realize that the true worth of a person can never be measured by appearance or social status, and that true music would always be stronger than any mockery of the world. The moment Martha gently placed her weathered hands on the piano keys, the atmosphere in the room once again became unusually tense. All eyes in the room were fixed on the frail woman sitting before the grand piano, as if they were waiting for her to make a mistake, ready to erupt in mocking laughter that had been prepared in advance. In that suffocating silence, Martha could clearly hear the powerful beats of her own heart, each thump serving as a reminder that this was the moment she needed to prove her true worth. Madison sat in the front row, arms crossed with an air of confidence, her cold blue eyes closely observing Martha, clearly radiating challenge. A faint, half-smile of disdain appeared on Madison's lips, as if she was certain that the performance of this elderly janitor would become the most memorable, laughable moment of all. Around her, some students whispered to each other, while others were ready to burst out in laughter at the slightest misstep from Martha. Nearby, Mr. Grayson was also watching Martha intently, his sharp eyes gleaming with a mix of curiosity and clear skepticism. In his mind, the decision to have the janitor play was purely for entertainment, giving the wealthy students another reason to mock. But the calmness he saw on Martha's face at that moment left him slightly confused. However, he quickly pushed that feeling aside, telling himself that there was no way she could play a decent melody. It was simply impossible. Martha, sitting at the grand piano, suddenly felt her hands tremble violently, not because she lacked confidence in her ability, but because of the immense pressure from the scrutinizing eyes and the mocking laughter echoing around her. She knew well that the small world in this room was waiting for her to fail, waiting for her to hit a wrong note, waiting for her to falter and stop midway, so they could continue their merciless mockery. The thought nearly took her breath away, and her fingers felt as though they couldn't move. Several seconds passed in that dreadful silence, and finally she took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. The distant memories flooded back, stronger and more vivid than ever before. She remembered the first time she stood on a large stage, when young Martha's hands had trembled just like this, but the music had guided her through all her fears. Now, after so many years in the darkness and silence, she understood that only music could help her overcome this difficult moment. And then, she gently pressed her finger down on the first key. A clear, soft sound rang out, shattering the tense silence and causing a few students to straighten up, stunned. But almost immediately, a few giggles echoed from the back of the room, as if they were deliberately trying to throw her off. Madison flashed a cold smile, her gaze becoming even more challenging, as if she believed the faint sounds were just the beginning of an inevitable failure. Martha closed her eyes for a moment, took another deep breath, and poured all the emotions and beautiful memories of her life into her fingertips. When she opened her eyes, she was completely focused on the piano before her. Her weathered, calloused fingers began to glide gently across the keys, each note ringing out softly but powerfully, spreading through the room like a gentle wave, yet full of strength. But the quiet laughter continued from behind, as though it was deliberately challenging her, causing her heart to waver once again. For a brief moment she almost lost her focus, and her fingers trembled, causing a note to go slightly off-key. Madison immediately raised an eyebrow, her smile growing clearer, as if to say, "I knew it. You can't do it." However, instead of stopping or giving up, Martha regained her composure and played with even more strength and determination. Each note that followed was played with all her heart and soul, as if she was using the music to fight against all the mockery and contempt. No longer was she Martha, the frail old janitor. Now, she was the true artist Martha, and the piano was the stage she had longed to stand on once more in her life. Her notes grew stronger, clearer, and the laughter from the back of the room gradually faded away. Madison found herself frowning, her expression shifting to one of confusion mixed with discomfort. She had never thought that the small woman she had always looked down upon could produce such beautiful sounds. And in that moment, Martha knew she had overcome the hardest challenge of her life. But she didn't stop there. She knew that these were just the first notes, and what she was about to do next would make everyone in the room realize that they had been completely wrong in underestimating her. She was ready to let the music carry her further, to rise above all the mockery and prejudice so that for the first time in her life, she could fully live out her greatest passion. As Martha's fingers continued to glide gently over the piano keys, the initially faint sound gradually gave way to soft, deep melodies, entirely different from what those present in the room had been expecting. In that brief moment, when she began to play the first notes of Clair de Lune, one of Debussy's most beautiful and intricate piano works, the entire atmosphere in the classroom suddenly changed, as if someone had used magic to transform a scene full of mockery and coldness into something completely different. The space in the Willow Ridge Academy music room fell into a deep silence, only the sound of Martha's aged but deeply emotional fingers resonating, gently but deeply touching the hearts of the listeners. No one laughed anymore, no one whispered or mocked. All sat still, as if hypnotized by the magical and authentic music pouring from the heart and soul of the small woman whom, just moments ago, they had looked down upon and ridiculed. Madison, who had just looked at Martha with a defiant gaze, now had her bright green eyes wide open in astonishment. The haughty, cold smile that was her usual expression had completely disappeared, replaced by a confusion she had never shown before. In Madison's heart at that moment, the absolute confidence that had always been her perfect shield was beginning to crack, replaced by a strange feeling of unease. She couldn't believe that the woman she had always looked down upon, the one she had treated as a mere amusement, could produce such mesmerizing, beautiful, and authentic music. The other students in the class shared a similar sense of shock. None of them had ever imagined that Martha, the elderly, small, and quiet janitor they always saw scrubbing the hallways every day, possessed such an incredible musical talent. Their gazes gradually shifted from mockery and curiosity to one of respect mixed with genuine admiration, something they had never thought they would feel for this woman. But perhaps the most stunned in the room at that moment was Mr. Grayson. Standing in the corner, his hands hanging loosely at his sides, his usually calm and cold face had turned pale, his eyes wide open in astonishment and confusion. In all his years in music and teaching, he had never felt anything like this. The realization that he had been completely wrong in underestimating someone's abilities and worth simply based on their appearance and social status. Each note Martha played felt like a powerful reminder that music truly belonged to no single class, that true talent always finds a way to shine, even when buried by a harsh life and societal prejudices. Mr. Grayson now clearly felt that he had made a serious mistake in looking down on Martha, in allowing his pride and biases to cloud his eyes and heart to real talent. The more he listened to the beautiful and refined sound of Clair de Lune echoing through the classroom, the more deeply Mr. Grayson realized that not only had he misjudged Martha, but he was also losing the true value of being a teacher, a true musical artist. His heart felt suffocated with regret and shame. For the first time, he saw himself as small and insignificant before the true power of art and the courage of the woman he had always looked down upon. By the piano, Martha continued to play, her eyes fully immersed in the world of music, no longer feeling the pressure or worry from the gazes around her. For her, all that remained were beautiful memories of her youth, of the unfinished musical dreams, and of the endless love she had always had for the arts. Her aged, calloused hands seemed to be revived, with each note carrying all the pain, joy, hope, and even the deepest regrets of her life. The entire room was enveloped in the stunning music, and no one remembered the small, elderly janitor standing before them. Now, Martha truly was the only artist in the room, the artist who was stirring the hearts of all those proud and arrogant people, the artist who had used music to break down all prejudices and mockery. As the final notes of Clair de Lune softly echoed and faded into the air, the room remained in absolute silence, a silence no one wanted to break. The astonished, wide-eyed gazes of Madison, the other students, and Mr. Grayson were all fixed on the small woman by the piano, as if waiting for something to happen next. And in that brief moment Martha looked up, her eyes meeting those of everyone in the room for the first time, with a gaze that was both strong and gentle, as if to say, at last she had reclaimed her true worth, that she was no longer the invisible, disregarded woman. On the contrary, she had made everyone in that room quietly reconsider themselves, their beliefs, and what they had been pursuing in life. As the final notes of the piece Clair de Lune faded into the stillness of the room, everyone remained immersed in a state of disbelief that seemed almost impossible to comprehend. The air had become frozen, a profound silence stretching on as if no one dared speak, lest they shatter the magical moment that had just passed. Shocked, stunned gazes continued to focus on the small woman seated at the piano, her frail hands gently resting on the keys, trembling yet filled with pride. In the midst of this silence, Madison Harrington, who had always stood out with her absolute confidence, now found herself unable to maintain her usual haughty expression. Her typically sharp, cold blue eyes now bore an expression of confusion, tinged with doubt and a hint of embarrassment. Slowly, Madison turned her head to look at the friends around her, awaiting the familiar nods of approval, but this time she was met with nothing but silent stares, faces filled with deep reflection and contemplation. Perhaps, for the first time in her life, Madison clearly felt that her power and arrogance were not enough to change the reality that had just unfolded. In the corner of the room, Mr. Grayson remained motionless, as though he were trying to catch his breath after the shock he had just experienced. His eyes remained fixed on the piano before slowly shifting towards Mrs. Martha, the woman he had once scorned without hesitation, treating her as a mere joke. The prejudices, arrogance, and belief in his own absolute power that he had always held suddenly felt fragile, like a once solid wall now marred by cracks that could not be repaired. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity of silence, Mr. Grayson took a step closer, clearing his throat gently, as if trying to mask the clear embarrassment on his face. His steps were no longer confident as usual, but slow and hesitant, as though he were attempting to hold on to the last shred of pride he had. Standing before Mrs. Martha, he reluctantly spoke, his voice betraying a noticeable effort. I never imagined you could play so well," he admitted, each word coming out with difficulty and bitterness, as though he were forced to acknowledge a humiliating defeat in front of all the students he had once held absolute control over. Mr. Grayson's words left everyone in the room stunned, as it was the first time they had ever heard him offer praise to someone he had once looked down upon. Though it was a reluctant compliment for all the students present, it was a significant acknowledgment, enough to shatter the image of the cold, arrogant teacher they had always known. However, instead of silently lowering her head to accept the praise as Mr. Grayson had expected, Mrs. Martha slowly lifted her head, for the first time meeting his gaze directly. Her eyes now shone with a determined strength, yet softened with the kindness of one who had lived a long life full of experience. She had spent too long in the shadows of invisibility, and now she had decided not to allow anyone else to belittle or deny her worth any longer. With a voice warm yet clear, Mrs. Martha responded powerfully and convincingly in front of everyone present, especially before the man who had once disrespected her the most. Talent does not need permission to be recognized, but those with power must learn humility to see it. Her words rang out like a bold declaration, stirring the hearts of everyone present. It was not just a reminder for Mr. Grayson, but a profound message to the powerful young people like Madison, and anyone else who had ever looked down on her. Mrs. Martha's words were like a powerful bell, piercing through every prejudice and invisible barrier that had always existed within each person's heart. Mr. Grayson's face turned pale, and his eyes momentarily revealed a shame he could not hide. He had never imagined that one day a small, elderly woman, whom he had once seen as inferior, would make him question himself so deeply. The bitterness within him now was not only because he had misjudged her, but because he realized he had lost the most valuable thing a teacher and a musician should possess: humility and the ability to recognize the true worth of every individual. Madison sat silently, her eyes cast downward, feeling more confused than ever before. This was the first time she had been confronted with the harsh truth that power, status, and money could not allow her to control everything. She realized that she had just witnessed an entirely different kind of power, the power of true talent and the courage to defend one's own value. The classroom remained in a profound silence, but it was no longer a silence of waiting or mocking. Instead, it was the silence of those who had just experienced a powerful awakening, a deep shift in their perception of the true value of humanity. Mrs. Martha's words were not just a powerful statement, but the beginning of a meaningful change, one that would forever alter the way they viewed the world and themselves from this moment onward. Right after Martha's powerful statements, a deep silence filled the room for a few seconds, as if everyone was holding their breath to fully digest what they had just heard. But only a brief moment later, like an unexpected wave sweeping away all hesitation, the classroom erupted in a thunderous round of applause, louder and more powerful than ever, expressing sincere admiration for the woman who had just made them realize the true meaning of talent and courage. At first, the applause came from just a few students in the back of the room, but it quickly spread throughout the entire classroom, merging together to create a resounding sound, as if trying to make up for all the times they had unknowingly or deliberately disregarded Martha in the past. Each clap was filled with regret, respect, and gratitude for the valuable lesson they had just received, that no one should ever look down on others based on their appearance, social status, or wealth. Amidst this sea of emotional sound, Martha stood still by the piano, her eyes now shining with a warm and gentle light that had probably not appeared for a long time. She lowered her head slightly, saying nothing more, but her face was no longer that of a person being looked down upon, but that of an artist full of pride and dignity. For the first time in many years, she felt that she was no longer invisible, and that her talent, perseverance, and courage had finally been fully recognized by the outside world. Meanwhile, Madison Harrington, sitting quietly in the corner of the room, felt as though a fire was burning inside her. Her heart was filled with anger, but alongside that, a sense of helplessness and despair. This was the first time Madison clearly realized that her wealth, power, and perfect appearance had become completely meaningless in the face of true strength from someone she had once looked down upon. The applause, the respectful gazes her classmates directed at Martha, made Madison feel like a stranger in a world that had once been hers. She had always believed that power, wealth, and fame were enough to help her control everything. But now she was facing the harsh truth that true talent and human value could never be measured by money or power. For the first time, Madison felt small, out of control, and completely powerless in the face of the current situation. She tried to glance around, hoping to find sympathy from the friends she had once easily controlled and manipulated, but no one responded to Madison's gaze. They no longer looked at her with admiration or fear as they once did. Instead, All their attention was now focused on Martha, who had just been the joke Madison used for entertainment. Madison's anger now no longer targeted Martha. It shifted to herself and everything she had once believed in. She was angry because she realized that she was the real loser in the power game she had created. She was angry because, in this moment, the values she had considered absolute, the ones that had helped her dominate and control others, had now become illusions, vanishing right before her eyes. At the same time, Mr. Grayson, who had been silently standing in the corner of the room, for the first time felt that he had truly failed before a student he had once pampered like Madison. He realized that he had contributed to Madison's arrogant and self-righteous nature by nurturing discrimination, elevating wealth and power instead of respecting true talent and human value. This bitter awakening made him stand still, unable to say another word, deeply immersed in shame and regret. The sound of applause gradually faded, but the change in each person's heart had been engraved forever. Martha slowly stood up, gently walked away from the piano, and headed toward the classroom door, with all the students watching in respectful silence. No one dared to laugh, whisper, or mock her again. The gazes toward her now were filled with respect, gratitude, and a deep sense of admiration. Before leaving the room, Martha turned to look at everyone one last time. In her eyes there was no reproach or anger, only a gentleness and compassion that only those who had gone through much hardship could possess. She did not need any more words, for what she had expressed through her music and her determination was the clearest lesson for all. As she walked out of the classroom, the atmosphere remained in a profound silence, but one full of meaning. The students looked at each other, feeling for the first time that they had just witnessed something far greater than any lesson or teaching they had ever heard. For the first time, they clearly understood that a person's true value can never be measured by power, status, or wealth. Madison sat behind, watching Martha's figure disappear down the hallway. Her heart felt like it was about to burst with anger and helplessness, but within it also lingered a strange and unfamiliar feeling, something akin to the first time she truly understood what humility meant. And in that moment, everyone knew that, from now on, none of them could ever look at the world and themselves the same way again. A profound awakening had occurred, and whether small or large, the change would follow them forever, like a deep lesson about the true value of every human being. As soon as the small yet proud figure of Mrs. Martha disappeared from the doorway, the classroom remained enveloped in deep silence, as if everyone was still trying to grasp what had just occurred. But at that very moment, in the midst of this reflective pause, a voice, gentle yet firm, echoed from the door, making everyone jump and turn around. "I've heard it all," said Mrs. Collins, a composed woman always respected for her seriousness and fairness, as she slowly entered the room. She stood there, her gaze both resolute and warm, directed towards Mrs. Martha, who stopped in her tracks in surprise when she heard her name called. Mrs. Collins was not a teacher who stood out for her flamboyance or authority like Mr. Grayson, but she was beloved by both students and colleagues for her integrity, dedication, and ability to recognize the true worth in every individual. No one knew that for a long time she had been quietly listening to and silently feeling the melodies that Mrs. Martha played every night, an accidental yet fateful discovery. And now, standing in front of a classroom that had just undergone a profound awakening, Mrs. Collins knew this was the moment she had to speak up to protect the talent she had unknowingly uncovered. Mrs. Collins took another step forward, closer to Mrs. Martha, her eyes shining with respect and sincerity. "A talent like yours should not be wasted any longer. I would like to invite you to perform in the school concert next week." Her simple words rang like thunder in the silence, leaving the whole class stunned. Students exchanged astonished glances, trying to make sense of the unexpected turn of events unfolding before them. But perhaps no one was more shocked and bewildered than Madison and Mr. Grayson. Madison, who had always believed she was the school's one and only shining star, was overwhelmed with shock and confusion. Mrs. Collins had never once directly complimented her like this, nor had she ever extended an invitation to perform to anyone who wasn't a famous, wealthy, or privileged student. In that moment, Madison felt her position and power, which she had always held firmly in her hands, slipping out of her control. A surge of anger mixed with helplessness rose within her more intensely than ever before. Meanwhile, standing right next to her, Mr. Grayson felt as if his pride, carefully nurtured over the years, had been struck a devastating blow. Mrs. Collins's invitation was not merely a chance to perform. It was a bold and unmistakable declaration that he had been completely wrong to overlook and dismiss the talent of this woman. It felt like a public judgment before all his students, causing him to feel embarrassed and humiliated to the point that he couldn't bring himself to lift his head. Mrs. Collins stood firm, unwavering in the face of the astonished and skeptical gazes of the entire class. She gently stepped closer to Mrs. Martha, and in a soft yet encouraging voice, she continued, "I've heard your music for a long time, but I never knew who the true creator was until today. Mrs. Martha, your music is not only beautiful, but carries a strength and depth rarely seen. You deserve to be on a big stage, where everyone can hear it, where your true talent is valued as it should be." Her words were like a gentle yet powerful breeze that swept into Mrs. Martha's heart, leaving her deeply moved. Tears welled up in her eyes, her old hands trembling as she placed them over her chest, as if trying to hold back the overwhelming emotions surging within her. For the first time in many years of quietly enduring, she felt a clear recognition, not out of pity, but from a sincere heart full of understanding and genuine respect. The entire class was silent, no one daring to speak, as they all witnessed something far beyond what they could have imagined. Madison lowered her head, biting her lip to hide the anger and helplessness she was feeling. She clearly sensed that in this moment, all the wealth, power, and social status she had always relied on no longer held any meaning. Mr. Grayson stood motionless, his face pale from the shock and the bitter taste of defeat. In his heart, there was not only shame, but also a deep regret for having missed the opportunity to be the first to discover and nurture this talent. Mrs. Martha looked around the room, feeling the profound shift occurring in the hearts of everyone present. Finally, she gently nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude and pride as she turned towards Mrs. Collins, the only one who had the courage to see and defend the talent she had kept hidden for so long. "Thank you, Mrs. Collins. I will perform." Her simple words once again made the room light up, but this time there was no astonishment or disbelief. Instead, there was a deep understanding that this was not just an opportunity for Mrs. Martha, but for everyone to awaken and change, and that a true talent is never too late to be recognized, as long as one has the courage to see it with a sincere heart and true humility. As the sincere and powerful words of Ms. Collins still gently echoed in Mrs. Martha's mind, she slowly stepped out of the classroom door. This time, not with the heavy feeling of shame or the usual invisibility, but with a heart that felt light and strangely free. The familiar path toward the small church seemed shorter today, lighter, as for the first time in many years she no longer carried the burden of fear or hesitation. The sky had turned to late afternoon, and the soft glow of the sunset bathed the streets in a warm orange hue, as if gently embracing Mrs. Martha, a woman who had just rediscovered her true worth. Her steps were light but steady, the sound of her footsteps quietly echoing on the old cobblestone path, blending with the peaceful ambiance of the evening. When she reached the church door, she paused for a moment, taking a deep breath, clearly sensing the familiar scent of old wood and the stillness of the place. For decades, this place had been a silent companion, witnessing all the tears, sighs, and fragile hopes she had entrusted through the keys of the old piano. Entering the church, she softly closed the wooden door behind her, separating herself completely from the outside world. The familiar space, with its old pews, dim lights, and especially the ancient piano in the center of the room, was all waiting for her return. Mrs. Martha moved closer to the piano, her aging hands trembling slightly, her heart overwhelmed with indescribable emotion, a mixture of joy and intense sentiment. Sitting before the familiar piano, she felt her heart beat strongly, each thump echoing clearly as if reminding her that this moment was entirely real. Tears began to fall down her cheeks, not tears of sorrow, but of happiness, relief, and freedom that she had waited for so long. She gently placed her calloused fingers on the old keys and began to play. The first notes rang out pure and gentle, yet full of life, as if telling the long story of her life, from her youthful days full of dreams and passion to the years spent in the shadows of prejudice, fear, and resignation. In the resonating sound of the music, Mrs. Martha could clearly feel every memory returning, more vivid than ever. The days of her youth when she stood on the big stage, full of energy and passion for music, the applause of the audience, the pride in her parents' eyes, those moments felt as if they were coming to life again, so clear and real that she felt as if she were truly reliving her passionate youth. But at the same time, she could also see the painful years when her dreams and talents were forgotten and buried by societal prejudices, poverty, and the color of her skin. For years, she had endured in silence, and many times she had considered giving up music, the one thing that could save her soul. But now, all those pains were no longer a burden. They had become the strength that allowed her to recognize her true value. With each resonating note, her tears flowed even more, but with those tears came her first genuine smile of happiness in many years. Her lips curved into a soft, sincere smile, a smile of freedom and liberation, as if she had just regained a large part of herself that she had lost throughout her life. Her music continued to echo throughout the small church, as if soothing and healing the wounds of the heart that had existed for so long. In that space, there was no Madison, no Grayson, no prying and mocking eyes anymore. There was only her, the piano, and the music, the only thing that truly understood her heart. At this moment, there was no place left in Mrs. Martha's heart for fear, pain, or insecurity. Instead, she was filled with a sense of tranquility, freedom, and true happiness. She no longer had to hide her talent or endure contempt from anyone. She had been recognized by her own ability and heart, and that had brought her an absolute freedom she had never experienced before. As the music ended, the space returned to silence, but it was a silence full of emotion. Mrs. Martha looked up at the soft light coming through the church window, her eyes still sparkling with tears, but her lips now wore a truly peaceful and happy smile. She whispered softly, as if speaking to herself, "Finally, I am free." And in that moment she understood that this was not just her liberation, but a powerful affirmation of the true value of every person, that it is never too late to reclaim the right to live fully with one's passion and talent. Mrs. Martha had returned to herself, and this time she knew for certain that no one could ever take away her joy and freedom again. The days passed quickly, and the community concert at Willow Ridge Academy had finally arrived. That evening, the school's large auditorium was packed with people, all eagerly awaiting a special event they knew would be unforgettable. The stage lights shimmered brightly, and the audience, dressed in their best attire, filled every row of seats. But unlike previous performances, tonight they weren't there to witness the usual performances of the talented students, but to welcome a special woman whose story had quickly spread throughout the community. At the side of the stage, Madison Harrington stood quietly, for the first time not the center of attention. Her cold blue eyes, now softened with a hint of doubt and sadness, watched as all the attention focused on someone she had once looked down upon. Madison realized clearly that the power, status, and wealth she had always relied on were not enough to control the genuine affection and admiration of others. In her heart now was a bitter sense of helplessness, for it was the first time she understood what it felt like to stand outside of the spotlight she had once been so familiar with. Nearby, Mr. Grayson sat silently, his hand resting on his knee, trembling slightly with nervousness and anxiety. Once the master of ceremonies, now he was just an audience member. His eyes no longer held the usual confidence and arrogance, but instead were filled with embarrassment, regret, and a hint of self-blame, for he had once looked down on someone whom everyone had come to honor today. For the first time, Mr. Grayson felt true humility, something he had never experienced before. Then the stage lights dimmed, and a small but dignified figure emerged from behind the curtains. It was Mrs. Martha. She appeared in an elegant dress, her face lightly made up but radiating happiness. As she walked toward the grand piano at the center of the stage, applause erupted throughout the auditorium, a respectful and sincere welcome for her. In that moment, Mrs. Martha's heart raced, but this time it wasn't fear. It was deep emotion and unprecedented joy. The applause was not out of pity, but because they truly recognized her value and talent, something she had kept hidden for decades. She gently bowed her head in response, her eyes filled with tears but brimming with pride and profound gratitude. As she sat at the piano, all the noise in the auditorium immediately fell into silence. The entire space seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her music to fill the air. Mrs. Martha took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a moment, and began to play. The music flowed with clarity and grace, gentle yet powerful, carrying all the deepest emotions of her life: joy, pain, and the freedom she had just found. The music echoed through the auditorium, spreading gently but with great force, as if each note carried its own message, deeply touching the hearts of everyone listening. In the notes of the melody, the audience not only heard the story of Mrs. Martha's life, but also saw themselves, their unfinished dreams, their fears, the prejudices they had either created or been victims of. Everyone felt that they were witnessing something truly special, something far deeper than any usual performance. Madison sat silently, listening, her gaze softening, for the first time truly understanding the meaning of respecting the real worth of each person. She realized that a person's value could not be bought with money or power, and for the first time she understood this deeply and clearly. Mr. Grayson lowered his head, his eyes filled with thought, no longer carrying any trace of arrogance. He knew that from this day forward, he would never look at the world and his students with the same eyes. He had truly understood that true value does not lie in social status, but in the heart and perseverance to overcome all challenges and prejudices. The music ended with a thunderous round of applause, lasting as if it never wanted to stop. Mrs. Martha stood, bowed to the audience once more, her face lighting up with a truly radiant and joyful smile. She had fulfilled her lifelong dream, not for fame, wealth, or power, but to live fully with the talent and worth she had worked so hard to preserve through so many years of pain and struggle. Amidst the applause, a soft voice began to speak, reaching out to everyone in the auditorium, delivering the most sincere and profound message. A person's value does not come from money or social status. True value lies in the heart and in the perseverance to overcome prejudice. True talent will always find its own light. Mrs. Martha's story did not end here, but began to spread as a powerful reminder that every person deserves to be recognized and appreciated, not because of their wealth, power, or status, but simply because they are brave enough to live fully with their true talent and worth. And that true talent will always and forever find its light, no matter how harsh the world outside may be. Mrs. Martha's story showed us that every individual has their own worth, and true talent will always find a way to shine, even when obscured by societal prejudices or life's difficulties. Never let others define you, for only you truly understand your own real value. And you, have you ever witnessed or experienced a similar situation where value and talent were overlooked just because of appearance or prejudice? Share your story in the comments below. If you found this story meaningful and want to spread its positive message to more people, don't forget to like, share this video, and especially subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next inspiring stories. Thank you, and see you in the next videos.